The rain fell heavily over Seoul, blurring the lights of the city into streaks of silver and gold. Every person walking along the crowded streets hurried beneath umbrellas, desperate to escape the storm. But in front of an old concert hall, one young woman remained perfectly still. She was soaked from head to toe. Her trembling fingers clutched a small notebook tightly against her chest. People walked past her as though she didn't exist. Some pitied her. Others simply shook their heads. No one knew that she had been standing there for almost 2 hours, waiting for a man who had completely forgotten today's promise. Her lips parted slightly. Not a single sound came out. She couldn't call his name. She couldn't ask for help. She couldn't even tell him she was there. Then a sleek black luxury car slowly stopped beside the sidewalk. Several men in expensive black suits immediately stepped out, forming a protective line. The atmosphere changed instantly. Everyone nearby lowered their heads. Some quietly whispered, "The chairman is here. The Mafia boss." The rear door opened. A tall Korean man stepped out. His perfectly tailored black coat fluttered in the cold wind. His sharp jawline, calm expression, and commanding presence made him impossible to ignore. His name carried fear throughout Seoul. Businessmen respected him. Politicians avoided provoking him. Even rival organizations chose peace instead of conflict whenever his company entered a negotiation. To the public, he was simply a billionaire CEO. But beneath the polished image, everyone knew he controlled one of Korea's most powerful underground organizations. He was a man whose heart had long ago become colder than winter itself. As he walked toward the entrance, his eyes briefly landed on the silent woman standing alone in the rain. He froze. She looked familiar. Not because of her face, because of the notebook in her hands. Because years ago, he had seen that exact notebook before. The woman slowly lifted it. Her shaking fingers turned one page. Only 5 words were written. "You promised you'd return." The color slowly disappeared from his face. A memory he had buried for years suddenly came rushing back. But what he didn't know was that the woman standing silently before him had already spent years risking everything to protect his life. And she had never once expected him to know. If you love Korean billionaire romance and mafia love stories like this, subscribe now to @Physial_Threads and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Long before anyone called him the Ice Chairman, there had been a different version of him. A lonely young boy. One who rarely smiled. One who trusted almost no one. Back then, his family's influence was already enormous, but wealth could never replace warmth. His father believed emotions were weaknesses. His grandfather believed loyalty mattered more than love. Every lesson he learned centered around power, discipline, and sacrifice. As he grew older, he became exactly what everyone expected. Calm, disciplined, untouchable. His name was Kang Min-jae. Every newspaper praised his intelligence. Every competitor feared his business instincts. Employees admired him from a distance, but never dared become close. No one had ever seen him genuinely laugh in years. Marriage had become another business topic people constantly discussed. Powerful families introduced their daughters. Famous actresses secretly hoped to catch his attention. Models, socialites, and heiresses appeared at every charity gala he attended. He rejected every single one. His answer never changed. "I have no interest in marriage." The media created countless rumors. Some believed he was incapable of love. Others assumed he secretly loved someone impossible to reach. Only one elderly woman knew the truth. His grandmother. One afternoon, she invited him to her traditional garden. The fragrance of fresh tea drifted gently through the air. Without looking at him, she quietly asked, "Have you forgotten your promise?" He remained silent. "You once told someone that if fate ever brought you together again, you would protect her for the rest of your life." His eyes narrowed. That was years ago. But promises don't grow old. He slowly stood. People change. His grandmother smiled sadly. Not all of them. Those words stayed with him longer than he wanted to admit. Meanwhile, several miles away, another life moved in complete silence. Her name was Zuri. She had come from a small East African island nation years earlier under a cultural scholarship that had promised opportunity and education. Instead, fate had handed her loneliness. She worked quietly inside one of Seoul's oldest libraries. Every morning before sunrise, she carefully arranged returned books, repaired damaged pages, and organized shelves no one else wanted to touch. She never complained. She simply smiled. Whenever customers asked questions, she answered by writing beautifully in a small notebook she always carried. Most regular visitors knew she couldn't speak. Some treated her kindly. Others assumed she wasn't intelligent simply because she remained silent. She never corrected them. Silence had become her safest place. Years earlier, one terrible night had stolen her voice forever. Not because she was born unable to speak, not because of illness, but because trauma had trapped every word inside her heart. Doctors had called it psychological mutism. Her body could speak. Her soul simply refused. The event that caused it remained locked away like a door she never dared open. Every evening after work, she visited the same quiet neighborhood cafe. She always ordered warm tea. She always sat beside the window. She always spent nearly an hour writing letters she never mailed. One rainy evening, the cafe owner gently placed a fresh slice of cake beside her tea. Zuri looked surprised. The older woman smiled warmly. "It's your birthday, isn't it?" Zuri blinked. She hadn't told anyone. Slowly, she wrote in her notebook. "How did you know?" The owner chuckled softly. "You come here every year on the same day." For a brief moment, Zuri smiled with genuine happiness. It was the kind of smile that made strangers feel peaceful. But just as quickly, it disappeared. Outside the cafe, a black sedan had quietly stopped across the street. Inside sat two men. One lowered a camera. "The chairman asked us to verify her identity." The other nodded. "It really is her." After all these years, neither of them noticed that Zuri had already seen the reflection of their vehicle in the cafe window. She lowered her eyes. She knew they had found her. She had expected this day for years. What she didn't expect was how quickly her carefully hidden past would begin unraveling. The next morning, Min Jae's chief assistant placed a thin brown envelope on his desk. "There is something you need to see." Without emotion, Min Jae opened it. Inside were photographs, one after another. A quiet woman organizing books, helping elderly customers, buying flowers, feeding stray cats before work, leaving handwritten notes for lonely children visiting the library. Simple moments, ordinary moments. Yet every photograph stirred something strange inside him. At the very bottom lay a faded picture from nearly 15 years earlier. A frightened teenage boy, a smiling young girl, one notebook, one promise. His heartbeat slowed. "So," he whispered, "you really came back." Outside his office, the city continued moving as though nothing had changed. But somewhere beneath Seoul's endless lights, destiny had already begun weaving two forgotten lives back together. Neither of them understood that the reunion ahead would not simply change their future. It would finally reveal the quiet sacrifices that had connected them all along. And when that truth surfaced, everything they believed about love, loyalty, and silence would be tested in ways neither could imagine. But what happens next changes everything. The following morning, Seoul awakened beneath clear skies, as though the storm from the previous night had never happened. People rushed toward subway stations, cafes filled with office workers, and luxury cars lined the streets leading into the city's financial district. Inside the top floor of Kong Group headquarters, however, the atmosphere remained unusually quiet. Kong Min Jae stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. His hands rested calmly in his pockets, but his thoughts were anything but calm. The faded photograph from the envelope still lay on his desk. He had looked at it more than a dozen times during the night. He rarely lost sleep. Yet this single picture had stolen every hour of it. His chief assistant, Mr. Han, entered carefully. "You asked me to investigate further." Min Jae nodded without turning around. "What did you find?" Mr. Han placed another folder on the desk. "Her full name is Zuri Amani." The assistant paused before continuing. "She has lived quietly in Korea for almost 8 years. No criminal record, no debts, no scandals. She works at Hanul Library 6 days a week." Min Jae remained silent. Mr. Han continued. "Everyone describes her the same way. How? Kind." The single word lingered in the room. "She volunteers at an elderly care center twice a month. She anonymously pays overdue library fees for students who can't afford them. Every winter, someone leaves coats outside a homeless shelter. We confirm she buys them." Min Jae slowly looked at the photographs again. Nothing about her life made sense. If she truly was the girl from his past, why had she never tried to find him? Why had she lived so quietly? And why had she never asked him to fulfill the promise he had made? Meanwhile, several kilometers away, Zuri unlocked the front doors of Hanul Library just before sunrise. She inhaled deeply. Libraries had always felt safe. Books never judged. Books never interrupted. Books never asked why she couldn't speak. Her co-workers admired her patience, but few truly understood her. As she pushed a cart filled with returned books through the history section, two younger employees whispered nearby. "I heard she's mute." "I know. She must have such a lonely life. I can't imagine never being able to speak." Zuri heard every word. She simply smiled to herself and continued arranging the shelves. She had learned years ago that people often mistook silence for sadness. The truth was more complicated. Silence had become her shield. Speaking wasn't what she missed most. Being understood was. Just before lunch, an elderly man entered the library carrying several heavy boxes. Without hesitation, Zuri hurried over to help him. The man smiled warmly. "You always appear before I even ask." She laughed silently, placing a hand over her heart before writing quickly inside her notebook. Kindness should never wait to be requested. The old man read her words and smiled. "That's exactly what your mother used to say." For just a second, her smile disappeared. She gently lowered her eyes. Her mother. She still thought about her every single day. The memories always came gently at first. The scent of jasmine tea. The sound of soft singing. A warm embrace. Then suddenly, everything became darkness. Broken glass. Terrified screams. A frightened child frozen in place. A promise. Then, silence. She closed the notebook before the memories could continue. Some wounds never truly healed. At that exact moment, a black luxury vehicle stopped across the street. Min Jae stepped out alone. No security surrounded him. No assistance followed. He looked nothing like the feared Mafia chairman today. He simply looked like a man searching for an answer. From outside the library windows, he saw her. She was kneeling beside a little girl who appeared frustrated over a difficult puzzle book. Unable to explain with words, Zuri smiled and patiently demonstrated each step with colorful drawings. Within minutes, the little girl solved it. Her face lit up with excitement. She hugged Zuri tightly. Zuri hesitated for only a moment before gently hugging her back. Min Jae watched silently. This wasn't the person newspapers described. This wasn't someone chasing money or influence. She looked peaceful, almost too gentle for the world she lived in. As he entered the library, several visitors immediately recognized him. Whispers spread through the room. "Isn't that Chairman Kong? What is someone like him doing here? He owns half the city." Zuri looked up. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to slow. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Years of forgotten memories stood quietly between them. Min Jae walked closer. She instinctively tightened her grip on the notebook. Finally, he stopped only a few feet away. His voice remained calm. "Do you remember me?" She stared into his eyes for several long seconds. Then, she nodded, very gently. His heartbeat quickened. "So, you really never forgot." She slowly wrote something inside her notebook before holding it toward him. "I remembered, but I didn't want to interrupt your life." Those simple words struck him harder than he expected. Most people would have demanded explanations, questions, compensation. She asked for nothing, only distance. He looked at the notebook again. "You should have come." She smiled softly before writing another sentence. "I promised someone I wouldn't." His brows furrowed. "Who?" Her fingers stopped moving. She closed the notebook. Some promises could not yet be explained. Min Jae realized he wasn't the only one carrying secrets. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Not painful, simply unfinished. He looked around the library. "This isn't where you belong." Several nearby employees exchanged nervous glances. Everyone assumed he was insulting her. Instead, he quietly continued. "You deserve a place where no one underestimates you." Her eyes widened. For the first time in years, someone hadn't pitted her. He had seen her. As they stood facing one another, an elegant woman entered the library. She wore expensive designer clothing, high heels, and a confident smile. Her name was Seo Yerin, daughter of one of Korea's wealthiest families. For nearly 2 years, both media and business circles had assumed she would eventually marry Min Jae. She certainly believed so. The moment she noticed him standing beside another woman, her smile disappeared. She walked over gracefully. Chairman Kong. He nodded politely. What brings you here? I could ask you the same. Her eyes shifted toward Zuri. She looked the librarian up and down. Simple dress. No jewelry. No makeup beyond natural beauty. Nothing impressive. At least, not at first glance. Yeren smiled politely. Does she work here? Min Jae answered. Yes. Yeren looked directly at Zuri. Can you recommend a few books? Zuri smiled and reached for her notebook. Before she could write, Yeren interrupted. Oh, I forgot. You can't speak. The words sounded sympathetic, but the tone wasn't. Several nearby customers looked uncomfortable. Zuri simply nodded politely. She had experienced this kind of behavior countless times. Min Jae noticed the change in her eyes. She wasn't offended. She was accustomed to it. Somehow, that hurt even more. Yeren continued smiling. It must be difficult, depending on everyone else. Without warning, Min Jae spoke. Actually, everyone looked toward him. I think she's stronger than most people I know. Silence filled the room. Even Zuri looked surprised. Yeren forced another smile. That's generous. Min Jae calmly replied. No, it's simply true. For the first time in years, someone had defended Zuri before she needed to defend herself. She lowered her eyes, hiding the tears threatening to appear. Not because his words were extraordinary, but because no one had ever spoken for her like that. As Min Jae prepared to leave, he stopped beside her desk. I'll return tomorrow. She looked confused. He added quietly, there are things we still need to talk about. After he walked away, the library felt strangely different. The whispers had changed. Instead of pity, people now looked at Zuri with curiosity. Who exactly was she? And why would the most powerful man in Seoul visit her twice? That evening, Zuri returned to her tiny apartment. It was modest but warm, filled with books, potted plants, and neatly folded blankets. She opened an old wooden box hidden beneath her bed. Inside were dozens of letters. None had ever been mailed. Every single one was addressed to the same person, Kong Min Jae. The earliest letter was written nearly 10 years ago. The newest, only 3 weeks earlier. She gently unfolded one. I heard you became successful today. I'm proud of you, even if you never know I exist. Another letter read, you once promised to protect me, but you've been carrying enough burdens. So I'll protect you instead. A single tear landed softly on the paper. Outside her apartment building, unnoticed by everyone, a man remained inside a parked vehicle, not watching her with harmful intentions, watching over her. He picked up his phone. Chairman, she's still keeping the promise. Min Jae closed his eyes after hearing those words. He whispered to himself, then it's finally time to keep mine. But neither of them realized that the promise connecting their lives was far deeper than either remembered. And hidden within the pages of Zuri's unwritten story was one truth capable of changing everything they believed about the past. That truth was getting closer with every passing day. The following week brought an unexpected change to both their lives. For years, Kong Min Jae had lived according to strict routines. Every morning began with business meetings, contract reviews, and decisions worth millions of dollars. Every evening ended in silence inside the enormous mansion that overlooked the Han River. His home was breathtaking. Marble floors reflected the morning sunlight. Ancient paintings decorated the walls. Fresh flowers appeared in every hallway before sunrise. Servants quietly maintained every corner of the estate. Yet despite its beauty, the mansion never felt like a home. It was too quiet, too perfect, too empty. Min Jae had spent years convincing himself that loneliness was easier than disappointment. Love complicated people. Marriage created weakness. Or at least, that was what he had believed. Until Zuri returned. He found himself thinking about her far more often than he intended. Her smile. Her notebook. The calm way she accepted misunderstandings without becoming bitter. It unsettled him. Because she possessed something wealth had never been able to buy. Peace. One afternoon, his grandmother requested another meeting. She watched him carefully as he poured tea. You visited the library 3 times this week. He looked up in surprise. You always know everything. She smiled. When an old woman has nothing to do except watch the people she loves, she notices many things. Min Jae remained quiet. She reached across the table and gently covered his hand. Tell me honestly, when you look at her, what do you see? He answered after a long silence. I see someone who keeps pretending she's fine. His grandmother nodded. And why do you think that is? Because I recognized the look. It was the first truly honest thing he had admitted in years. She smiled sadly. Perhaps that's why fate brought you back together. Meanwhile, Zuri's life continued as usual, at least on the surface. Every morning she arranged books. Every afternoon she helped visitors. Every evening she returned to her apartment carrying groceries in reusable bags. But now, she couldn't ignore the feeling that someone was quietly entering her carefully protected world. Min Jae never announced his visits. Sometimes he simply appeared at the library and spent 30 minutes reading near the window. Sometimes he borrowed books he clearly didn't need. Sometimes he sat across from her without speaking. The silence between them gradually became comfortable. Neither felt pressured to fill it. One rainy afternoon, the electricity suddenly went out inside the old library. Children became frightened. Several elderly visitors struggled to move safely through the dark. Without hesitation, Zuri began guiding everyone toward the emergency exits using a small flashlight. Min Jae happened to arrive just as the lights disappeared. Instead of leaving, he joined her. Together they helped every visitor reach safety. After nearly 20 minutes, the electricity returned. Everyone applauded the staff. One little boy tugged on Min Jae's sleeve. Sir, you and the pretty librarian make a really good team. Min Jae looked toward Zuri. She immediately lowered her head, embarrassed. The boy continued innocently. She's always smiling. You should smile too. Several people nearby laughed softly. Even Min Jae found the corners of his lips lifting ever so slightly. It wasn't a full smile, but it was enough to leave everyone speechless. One elderly woman whispered, I've never seen Chairman Kong smile before. Zuri noticed it too, for reasons she couldn't explain. Seeing him smile warmed her heart more than anything else that day. As the visitors gradually left, Min Jae walked beside her through the library garden. Cherry blossom petals drifted gently through the afternoon breeze. Neither hurried to speak. Finally, he broke the silence. Do you miss talking? Zuri thought carefully before opening her notebook. I miss singing. His expression softened. You used to sing? She nodded, then wrote another sentence. My mother said my voice sounded happiest when I sang. He stared at the words for a long time. Without realizing it, he imagined what her voice might have sounded like. Gentle, warm, comforting. Somehow, he already felt he had heard it before, just not with his ears. A few days later, Min Jae invited her to the mansion. The invitation shocked everyone around him. Even Mr. Han questioned it. Chairman, you've never invited anyone into your private residence. I know. Should we prepare the guest wing? Min Jae looked out the window. No. Prepare the house. The servants spent 2 full days cleaning rooms that were already spotless. Fresh flowers were arranged in every hallway. The gardens were trimmed again. The chef prepared meals from several countries after quietly researching East African cuisine, hoping something would remind Zuri of home. When she finally arrived, she stood frozen before the enormous gates. She had seen photographs of luxurious homes before. Nothing compared to this. The mansion looked less like a residence and more like a palace. As she entered, several staff members bowed respectfully. She immediately looked uncomfortable. Min Jae noticed. He gently wrote on a small piece of paper before handing it to her. They're greeting you, not judging you. She looked up. Their eyes met. Slowly, she smiled. For the first time since arriving, she relaxed. During lunch, the silence felt surprisingly peaceful. Instead of forcing conversation, they communicated through short handwritten notes. Sometimes he wrote. Sometimes she answered. Their notebooks gradually filled with tiny conversations. What book changed your life? She smiled before writing. The one that taught me forgiveness. He read the answer twice, then asked, Did you forgive the person who hurt you? Her hand stopped moving. She stared at the page for several seconds. Finally she wrote, I'm still learning. His chest tightened. He didn't ask another question. Some wounds deserved patience. After lunch, his grandmother unexpectedly appeared. The elderly woman smiled brightly the moment she saw Zuri. Without hesitation, she embraced her. Zuri looked startled. The grandmother stepped back and gently touched her face. You've grown into a beautiful young woman. Tears instantly filled Zuri's eyes. She remembered that embrace. Years ago, when she was still a frightened teenager. The warmth hadn't changed. Unable to speak, Zuri bowed deeply. The grandmother laughed softly. No, family doesn't bow. The word echoed inside the enormous living room. Family. Min-jae looked toward his grandmother in surprise. She simply smiled knowingly. Throughout the afternoon, the elderly woman quietly observed the pair. Neither realized they unconsciously looked after one another. Whenever Zuri reached for something heavy, Min-jae picked it up first. Whenever he forgot to eat while reading documents, she gently slid his untouched tea closer. Neither spoke, yet somehow, they understood each other. That evening, as the sun painted the gardens gold, Zuri wandered alone among the blooming flowers. She stopped before an old willow tree. A small wooden swing still hung beneath its branches. She stared at it in disbelief. Her fingers gently brushed the rope. A flood of memories returned. A younger Min-jae pushing the swing. Both of them laughing. A promise made beneath falling blossoms. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, Min-jae was standing only a few steps away. I never removed it. She turned toward him slowly. He continued quietly. I thought, if I did, I might forget. Her eyes filled with tears. She quickly wrote, You remembered. He shook his head. No, I remembered too late. For a long moment, neither moved. The distance between them suddenly felt much smaller than before. Not because they had stepped closer, because the years separating them were slowly disappearing. But what neither of them knew was that someone else had begun watching their growing closeness with increasing jealousy. And that jealousy would soon lead to a misunderstanding capable of breaking two hearts just as they were beginning to heal. The fragile bond between them had finally begun to bloom. Whether it would survive the coming storm remained to be seen. The days that followed became the happiest either of them had experienced in years. Neither of them admitted it aloud. Neither of them needed to. There was something beautiful about the quiet rhythm they had unknowingly created together. Every Tuesday evening, Min-jae finished work earlier than usual and stopped by Hanul Library. He no longer needed an excuse to borrow books. The librarians had already realized that the chairman spent more time watching one librarian smile than he did reading. Whenever Zuri noticed him arrive, she would quietly place a cup of hot tea on the small table near the window before he even sat down. She had memorized how he liked it. No sugar. A little honey. Just warm enough to drink immediately. The first time she did it, he looked surprised. She simply smiled and pointed toward his untouched cup from the previous visit. She had noticed. He smiled to himself. Someone had been paying attention. His entire life, people had noticed his wealth, his influence, his reputation. Very few had ever noticed the little things. Whether he had eaten, whether he looked tired, whether he had slept. Zuri noticed all of them, without saying a single word. One afternoon, while organizing books together, Min-jae accidentally cut his finger on the sharp edge of a damaged page. It wasn't a serious injury, just a small cut. Before he could react, Zuri gently reached for his hand. Her movements were careful, almost instinctive. She took a clean handkerchief from her pocket and wrapped it around his finger. Her expression was filled with concern. She frowned as though the tiny cut had happened to her instead. Min-jae looked down at their hands. He couldn't remember the last time someone had cared for him so naturally. Not because they expected something, simply because they wanted to. When she finished, she looked up. Their eyes met. For a brief second, neither of them moved. The entire library seemed to disappear around them. A librarian clearing her throat nearby brought them back to reality. Embarrassed, Zuri quickly stepped away. Min-jae quietly smiled. That tiny moment remained in his thoughts for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, Seo Yerin was becoming increasingly impatient. For years, she had believed marrying Min-jae was only a matter of time. Their families moved in the same circles. Business magazines constantly paired their names together. People assumed they were the perfect match. Elegant, powerful, influential. Only Min-jae had never encouraged those rumors. Now, everything was changing because of a quiet woman who couldn't even defend herself. Yerin couldn't understand it. What does he see in her? She finally decided to visit the library again. This time, she came alone. She found Zuri arranging children's books near the reading corner. Walking over with a polite smile, she placed several expensive gift boxes on the counter. The other librarians looked impressed. Designer chocolates. Luxury tea. Imported flowers. Yeren smiled sweetly. I brought these for the staff. Everyone thanked her. Then she turned toward Zuri. I also wanted to apologize if I made you uncomfortable the other day. Zuri smiled warmly and nodded. She believed the apology was sincere. It wasn't. As the other employees carried the gifts away, Yeren leaned slightly closer. Her smile never faded. You seem like a kind person. Zuri nodded politely. Yeren continued in a soft voice. Kind people should know when they don't belong somewhere. Zuri's smile slowly disappeared. Yeren glanced toward the library entrance before speaking again. Chairman Kong is admired by the entire country. He needs someone who can stand beside him during interviews, business meetings, international events. How can someone who can't even speak become his wife? The words pierced far deeper than Yeren intended. Not because they were cruel, because they echoed every fear Zuri had secretly carried for years. Could she really become part of Min-jae's world? Would she only embarrass him? Would everyone spend their lives speaking for her? For the first time since they reunited, doubt entered her heart. Yeren noticed the change immediately. Satisfied, she smiled. I only wanted you to think carefully. Then she walked away, leaving silence behind once again. That evening, Min-jae arrived at the library as usual. Something immediately felt different. Zuri smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She still served his tea. She still helped him choose books. Yet there was a quiet distance between them now. He noticed every small change. She avoided holding his gaze. She wrote shorter answers. She left earlier than usual. As she prepared to leave, Min-jae gently touched her notebook before she could put it away. Did I do something wrong? She quickly shook her head. He waited. After several long moments, she finally wrote, No. He looked at the sentence, then looked at her eyes. He knew she wasn't telling the whole truth. But he also knew forcing an answer would only make her retreat further. So instead, he handed her a folded piece of paper. She opened it after reaching home. Inside were only a few handwritten words. Whenever you're ready. I'll wait. Nothing more. No pressure. No questions. Just patience. The note rested on her bedside table all night. She read it again and again. Tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. She had spent years believing silence pushed people away. Yet somehow, it had drawn him closer. The following weekend, Min-jae's grandmother organized a small family dinner. Only close relatives attended. She specifically invited Zuri. The invitation frightened her. She worried she wouldn't fit in. But she accepted anyway. When she arrived, several relatives greeted her warmly. Others weren't as welcoming. One older aunt whispered loudly enough for others to hear. So this is the girl? I heard she can't speak. Another replied. Poor Chairman Kong. He deserves someone more suitable. Zuri heard every word. She quietly lowered her eyes. Before she could excuse herself, Min-jae stood up. The dining room immediately became silent. He looked calmly around the table. Then he spoke. The person I deserve. He glanced toward Zuri. Is someone whose heart is honest. His eyes returned to the relatives. And that's exactly who she is. No one answered. His grandmother smiled proudly. Dinner continued peacefully. Later that evening, while everyone enjoyed dessert in the garden, Min-jae noticed Zuri standing beneath the willow tree again. He walked over. She seemed lost in thought. He handed her a small wooden music box. Confused, she slowly opened it. A gentle melody filled the evening air. Her breathing caught. She recognized the tune immediately. It was the lullaby her mother used to sing. She looked at him in astonishment. He smiled softly. My grandmother taught it to me years ago. I didn't know why she insisted I remember it. I think. He looked into her eyes. She was hoping one day it would find its way back to you. Zuri could no longer hold back her emotions. Tears streamed down her face. She clutched the music box against her heart. Then, before she could stop herself, she stepped forward and gently embraced him. It lasted only a few seconds. But for Min-jae, time seemed to stand still. He slowly wrapped his arms around her. Not tightly, not possessively, simply enough to let her know. She wasn't alone anymore. Hidden behind the garden hedge, Seo Yeren witnessed the entire moment. Her expression darkened. She finally understood something she had refused to believe. Min-jae wasn't simply protecting Zuri. He was falling in love with her. And Zuri had already given him her heart years ago. What none of them realized was that the greatest secret had nothing to do with their growing love. Locked inside an old wooden chest in Zuri's apartment was a faded diary, one written by her late mother. Inside its fragile pages was the truth about the promise made years ago. The reason Zuri disappeared without a word. The reason she silently watched over Min Jae from afar. And the heartbreaking sacrifice that had stolen her voice. Very soon, that diary would finally be opened. And when its pages revealed the truth, neither Min Jae nor Zuri would ever see their past the same way again. The love that had quietly blossomed between them was about to face its greatest test, not through violence or revenge, but through a truth powerful enough to heal wounds they had both carried for far too long. The morning after the family dinner, Zuri woke before sunrise. The music box still rested on her bedside table. She gently wound its tiny key. The familiar lullaby filled the quiet apartment once again. Closing her eyes, she allowed the melody to carry her back to the happiest days of her childhood. She remembered running barefoot through fields of wildflowers while her mother laughed behind her. She remembered evenings filled with stories beneath the stars. She remembered believing that the world was kind. Then she remembered the promise. A promise that had quietly shaped every decision she had made since. Opening her eyes, she walked toward the small wooden chest hidden beneath her bookshelf. She hesitated. For years, she had refused to touch what was inside. Not because she wanted to forget, but because remembering hurt too much. Today felt different. Perhaps because, for the first time in years, she no longer carried her pain alone. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside were carefully folded letters, a faded blue scarf, an old silver necklace, and beneath them all, a worn leather diary. Its edges had become soft with age. The pages had yellowed. Yet her mother's elegant handwriting remained perfectly clear. Zuri gently brushed away a layer of dust before opening the first page. If my daughter is reading this someday, it means life has asked her to be stronger than any child should ever be. Tears immediately blurred Zuri's vision. She continued reading. There are truths I have hidden, not because I wish to lie, but because some truths are too heavy for young hearts. She closed the diary for a moment. Her breathing became uneven. Even after all these years, her mother's words still felt like a warm embrace. Meanwhile, across the city, Min Jae sat through an executive meeting. Charts appeared on enormous screens. Directors discussed overseas investments. Millions of dollars were being negotiated. Normally, every detail held his complete attention. Today, he barely heard a single word. His thoughts kept returning to the moment beneath the willow tree. The way Zuri had hugged him. The tears she couldn't hide. The quiet relief in her eyes. For the first time in many years, he realized he wanted something beyond success. He wanted someone to return home to. Mr. Han quietly noticed the chairman's distraction. After the meeting ended, he approached carefully. You've been thinking about her. Min Jae didn't deny it. Instead, he asked something unexpected. Mr. Han, when did you know your wife was the one? The older man smiled. It wasn't one big moment. It was hundreds of small ones. Min Jae listened quietly. My wife remembered things I forgot. She noticed when I was tired before I noticed myself. She made ordinary days feel peaceful. He chuckled softly. I realized one day that home wasn't a place anymore. It was simply wherever she happened to be. The words lingered in Min Jae's mind long after Mr. Han walked away. Back inside her apartment, Zuri continued reading. Each page revealed pieces of a past she had tried desperately to bury. Years earlier, her mother had worked as a translator for an international humanitarian organization. During one conference in Seoul, she had unexpectedly met Min Jae's grandmother. The two women had become close friends despite living on opposite sides of the world. Their friendship lasted for years. Letters traveled back and forth. Photographs were exchanged. Eventually, one summer, Zuri and her mother visited Korea. That was when young Zuri first met Min Jae. He had been distant, quiet, always standing alone while adults discussed business. No one realized how lonely he truly was. Except Zuri. She simply walked over and asked him to help her build a paper kite. He refused. She smiled anyway. Then built two. One for herself. One for him. By sunset, the lonely boy who never smiled was laughing freely across an open field. The diary described every detail. That boy carries sadness much older than his years. Your grandmother and I often prayed that the two of you would never lose your kindness. As Zuri continued reading, another folded letter slipped from between the pages. It wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to Kang Min-jae. She carefully unfolded it. If you ever read this, please don't blame yourself for what happened afterward. Her heart skipped. She had never seen this letter before. Just then, a gentle knock sounded at her apartment door. She quickly wiped away her tears before opening it. Standing outside was Min-jae's grandmother. The elderly woman smiled warmly. I hope I'm not interrupting. Zuri immediately welcomed her inside. As soon as the older woman noticed the diary resting on the table, her smile slowly faded. So, you finally opened it. Zuri nodded. The grandmother sat quietly beside her. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, the elderly woman sighed. I wondered how long it would take. She gently placed her hand over the diary. There are some memories that wait patiently until we're strong enough to face them. Zuri quickly wrote in her notebook. Did you know everything? The older woman nodded slowly. I knew enough. Another question appeared. Why didn't you tell him? The grandmother looked toward the window. Because it wasn't my story to tell. She smiled sadly. And because your mother asked me not to. Zuri lowered her head. The silence between them felt heavy. Not uncomfortable. Simply filled with years that could never be recovered. The grandmother reached into her handbag. From inside, she removed a small velvet pouch. I've kept this for 15 years. Curious, Zuri accepted it. Inside rested a simple silver ring. Not expensive, not decorated with diamonds. Just a plain handcrafted band. Her eyes widened. She remembered it instantly. Years ago, while playing beneath the willow tree, young Min-jae had slipped the ring onto her tiny finger, then declared with complete childhood confidence, when we grow up, I'll marry you. Both grandmothers had laughed. The children had blushed. No one expected either child to remember. Yet here it was. The ring had survived, just like the promise. Tears quietly rolled down Zuri's cheeks. The elderly woman smiled. He never asked for it back. He searched for it after you disappeared. Zuri looked surprised. The grandmother continued. He blamed himself for losing you. That single sentence broke something inside her. For years, she had believed disappearing protected him. She never imagined he had spent all those years believing he had failed her. Across town, Min-jae unexpectedly found himself driving toward the library. Not because he needed a book, simply because seeing Zuri had become the most peaceful part of his day. When he arrived, she wasn't there. One of the librarians smiled apologetically. She took the day off. He frowned slightly. Is she all right? I think so. She looked emotional this morning. Without realizing it, concern immediately settled over him. He thanked the staff and quietly left. Back inside the apartment, Zuri finally gathered enough courage to ask the question she had avoided for years. She wrote carefully. Should I tell him everything? The grandmother looked directly into her eyes. No. Zuri looked confused. The elderly woman smiled. You shouldn't. You should show him. She gently tapped the diary. These pages belong to both of you now. Zuri understood. Some stories deserve to be read, not explained. That evening, she carefully wrapped the diary in soft cloth before placing it inside her bag. Tomorrow, she would finally give it to Min-jae. She felt terrified, relieved, hopeful, for the first time since losing her voice. She believed silence no longer had to carry her alone. But as fate quietly prepared them for the truth, neither realized that another surprise was already waiting. Min-jae had spent the entire afternoon making a decision of his own. A decision that would completely change both of their lives. One that had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with love. When the sun rose again, two hearts carrying the same promise would unknowingly walk toward the moment destiny had been preparing for 15 long years. The next morning arrived with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming cherry blossoms through the streets of Seoul. For the first time in many years, both Kang Min-jae and Zuri awoke with the same thought. Today, neither of them knew exactly why the day felt different. They only knew that something long unfinished was finally ready to be completed. Zuri carefully placed the wrapped diary inside her canvas bag before leaving her apartment. She paused beside the door, taking one slow breath. Her hands trembled, not from fear, from hope. She had carried the truth for nearly 15 years. By sunset, She hoped she would no longer carry it alone. Across the city, Min Jae stood inside his study, staring at the small silver ring resting in his palm. He had searched for years before eventually believing it had been lost forever. Only yesterday his grandmother had quietly placed it back into his hand. "I think," she had said with a knowing smile, "it's finally time." He smiled to himself. For the first time in years. His smile came naturally. Not because he had won another business deal. Not because another company had expanded. But because he had found the person he never realized he had been searching for all along. Mr. Han entered the study. "The car is ready, Chairman." Min Jae nodded, then looked at his assistant. "I won't be coming back to the office today." Mr. Han smiled. "I already canceled every meeting." Min Jae looked surprised. "You assumed?" The older man chuckled. "No. I simply recognized the look on your face." "What look?" "The look of someone finally choosing happiness." Min Jae laughed quietly. A genuine laugh. Perhaps the first in many years. Meanwhile, Zuri arrived at Hanol Library earlier than usual. She carefully returned every borrowed book. She watered the small plants beside the windows. She straightened children's chairs that didn't need straightening. She was nervous. Her coworkers immediately noticed. One young librarian smiled. "You seem excited today." Zuri simply smiled back. She couldn't explain. Not yet. Just before noon, the familiar black luxury sedan stopped outside. Min Jae stepped out carrying nothing except a small velvet box inside his coat pocket. As soon as he entered, their eyes met. The rest of the world seemed to fade away. Without speaking, Zuri held up her notebook. "I need to show you something." He nodded. "So do I." They both smiled, almost laughing at the coincidence. Instead of remaining inside the library, they quietly walked toward the old botanical garden where they had once played as children. The garden looked almost exactly the same. Cherry blossoms danced through the air. Birds sang softly among the trees. The old willow tree still stood proudly beside the pond. Its wooden swing gently moved with the breeze. They sat together beneath its shade. For several moments. Neither hurried. Silence had never felt so beautiful. Finally, Zuri placed the wrapped diary into his hands. He looked confused. She simply nodded, encouraging him to open it. Carefully, he unfolded the cloth. The worn leather diary appeared. He looked toward her. She gently pointed to the first page. As he began reading, time seemed to disappear. Page after page revealed everything. The friendship between their grandmothers. The childhood summers they had shared. The promise both children had made beneath the willow tree. The letters never delivered. Then, he reached the final pages. His breathing slowed. His hands began trembling. The final chapter described the tragic event that had changed everything. Years earlier, after returning home, Zuri and her mother had been traveling through heavy storms while delivering relief supplies to remote villages. A terrible accident had occurred. Her mother had survived long enough to protect Zuri and leave behind the diary. During those terrifying hours, Zuri had desperately cried for help until her voice disappeared under overwhelming emotional trauma. Doctors later explained that the shock had silenced her mind rather than her body. She had never truly lost the ability to speak. She had lost the ability to relive that moment. Before her mother passed away, she made one final request. Never let guilt become someone else's burden. She knew young Min Jae would blame himself if he believed his promise had failed. So she asked Zuri to disappear quietly, to live peacefully, to never make him carry a sorrow that didn't belong to him. As tears rolled down his face, Min Jae unfolded the final hidden letter. "Dear Min Jae, if you are reading this, then fate has finally brought you back to my daughter. You once promised to protect her. But even after leaving Korea, she continued protecting you. Every time she heard news about your successes, she celebrated. Every time she heard criticism against you, she prayed for your strength. She never stopped believing that kindness would one day bring you together again. Please don't pity her silence. It has carried more courage than most voices ever could." By the time he finished reading, his vision had blurred completely. He slowly looked toward Zuri. She lowered her eyes. She feared seeing disappointment. Instead, he gently reached for her hands. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought I was the one who kept my promise too late." He smiled through tears. "But you've been keeping yours every single day." She nodded softly, then wrote one final sentence. I never stopped believing in you." The words shattered every wall around his heart. Without hesitation, he stood before her, then slowly knelt on one knee beneath the willow tree where everything had first begun. He opened the small velvet box. Inside rested the simple silver ring. Not a diamond, not something extravagant. The same handcrafted ring from their childhood. His voice trembled. "When I was a little boy, I made a promise without understanding how precious it was. I've spent years believing I lost the chance to keep it." He slipped the ring gently onto her finger. "But today, I want to make that promise again. This time, as the man I've become." He looked into her eyes. "Zuri, you never needed a voice for me to hear your heart. You've spoken to me through your kindness, your patience, your courage, and your love." He smiled warmly. "So, will you let me spend the rest of my life protecting the woman who has quietly protected me all these years?" Tears streamed freely down her face. She tried to answer. Nothing came. She closed her eyes, took one deep breath. Then, for the first time in 15 years, a sound escaped her lips. Soft, fragile, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "Yes." Both of them froze. Zuri covered her mouth in disbelief. Another tear rolled down her cheek. Min Jae's own eyes widened. She had spoken, not because anyone forced her, not because doctors found a miracle, but because her heart no longer carried the weight of fear alone. She laughed through her tears, a tiny, trembling laugh, then quietly spoke again. Min Jae, hearing his name in her voice, felt like witnessing the sunrise after the longest night. He gently embraced her. Neither noticed the tears in his grandmother's eyes as she watched from a nearby garden path. She whispered softly to herself, "Your mother would be smiling today." Months passed. The once silent mansion slowly transformed into a home filled with warmth. Books appeared in every room. Fresh flowers decorated the dining table because Zuri loved them. The staff laughed more often. Even Mr. Han admitted the house felt brighter. Min Jae no longer worked until midnight. He preferred evening walks through the garden with his wife. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they simply enjoyed the silence that had first brought them together. Zuri gradually regained more of her voice. Some days she spoke only a few words. Other days she laughed freely. Min Jae never rushed her. He had already learned the most important lesson. Love listens far beyond words. Together they established a foundation that provided education, language therapy, and emotional support for children recovering from traumatic experiences from different parts of the world. Above its entrance were simple words chosen by Zuri herself. "Every voice deserves to be heard, even the silent ones." People often admired Chairman Kang's success, but those closest to him knew his greatest achievement had nothing to do with wealth. It was learning that true strength wasn't found in power. It was found in compassion. The woman everyone once underestimated because she couldn't speak became the quiet heartbeat of countless lives. Not through speeches, not through fame, but through unwavering kindness. And the man who once believed love was a weakness discovered that trusting someone completely was the bravest decision he would ever make. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that love is never measured by status, appearance, or even words. It is measured by loyalty when no one is watching, by patience when life becomes difficult, and by choosing one another every single day. Healing takes time. Trust grows through small acts of kindness, and the deepest promises are often the ones kept in silence. If you made it this far, let us know where you're watching from and comment your favorite moment below. Like this video and subscribe to @Physial_Threads for more emotional Mafia love stories.